Hello and welcome back to another video, an introductory tying video. What we're going to look at today is a very popular, very effective fly. It's a nymph pattern and it's called a hare's ear nymph. I've got one here in the vise right now, which you can see. It can be tied in this form with just a normal thread head, or you can see they're also made with bead heads. They're very simple fly to tie. They've only got a couple of materials that you need, and they're very, very effective. So this one is called a gold-ribbed hare's ear nymph. Okay, so what you need to tie this in the very, very traditional way would be a hare's mask, which is just the face off of a hare. They're sold as a package like this. However, you don't need to buy a full hare's mask like this. Many people just simply use just loose dubbing, for example, hairline dubbing, like that, and you can see there's a dark hare's ear. We've got a lighter one over here that's actually squirrel, and you can see that the colors on them, they range from fairly dark to a lighter tan. Hope that's visible for you. I'm going to use the hare's ear, the hare's mask, just because it's a very traditional way to do it. The hook sizes are typically, they range from perhaps a size 8 on the large size, all the way down to even as small as an 18 on the small end of scale. Typically we use a fairly heavy-duty nymph hook, straight shank. You can use a curved shank if you want. Today I'm just going to use a straight shank. So I'll put the hook that I'm going to use into the vise, and as you can see, it's just a normal, this one in this case, so just for visibility, I'm going to use a size 8 hook. So you need the dubbing, a size 8 and smaller hook. You'll need wire or some kind of gold ribbing for it, and pheasant tail, which we'll use for a wing casing. And in this case I'm going to use red thread, partly for visibility for you folks and partly just for making a little hot spot on the front of the fly with red. And this is an 8/0 thread. It's a little bit finer. We are using a smaller hook, and we are going to be doing some direct to thread dubbing, and a little bit finer thread helps with that. So without any further comment, let's just get started. So we'll start by close to the back here, attaching the thread and working back basically towards where the barb of the hook would be if you're using a barbless hook. In this case I'm not, I'm using a barbed hook, and we'll just let it hang right there. Now I'm using a hare's mask, and when you look at a hare's mask, it's kind of got different lengths of fibers. You can see down here they're quite long. They are very light colored. In the middle here they're darker, and they have sort of a layering of the colors and some sort of banding at the top here. This is typically the fur that you would use for a tail on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim out a small part of that, just pull out a clump and nip it off with my scissors. Now this is not a large fly, so we don't need a large clump. When you trim off of a hare's mask, what you'll end up with is actually a whole lot of underfur in there that's very loose, and it's unwanted. Now, at least for the tail part. You can save that and use that as dubbing for the body of the fly if you wanted. Whoops, I lost track of that there. Regather that. I'm just going to pull out the bulk of that. And then what we're left with is just a small clump of fibers that you can see start off sort of dark in that and then have lighter colored tips. So what we want, so as we grab that, is we want it to be, if you can see the gap here of the hook, we want it to be roughly the length of that gap. So I've got pretty close to that. I'm going to put it onto the top of the shank of the hook right where my thread is. So when I tie it in, it will be where I want it. I'm going to take just a little bit longer, pinch it there, pinch my thread, come around, and whoops, just missed the fibers. I'm going to attach it to the shank of the hook. And you can see it's not an overly large tail. And just secure that down. Okay, go ahead a little bit. Now, what we need to put on next is the wire, which is going to form the rib. So I'm going to take my, in this case, small gold colored wire. Now, when you take wire off of a spool, you have to be careful because it can unspool on it, so always have control of the tag end of it. I'm going to take off more than I need, just so I can make sure that I'm always in control of this. Don't use your good scissors for this, or if you do, go way down to the V and snip it off. And what you do is you take your wire, you lay it on along the close side of the shank to you, or in this case to me, and just attach it. So I'm going to come down, and what I'd like to do is I'm going to stop my thread about 2 eye widths back from the eye of the hook. And I want to do that so that I have a space left over here for a thorax and wing casing and legs when I go to put it on. And so I know that's my stopping point for when I'm making the body. So I'm going to go back to my tail where I tied everything in, make sure that wire is secured down very tightly. And now what we're going to do is the dubbing. And the way you do that is you're going to take just a very, very tiny amount of wax. This is dubbing wax. It's not critically essential. It just helps. I'm just going to tap, 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 just to put a bit of wax onto my thread. I don't want to see any clumps of wax on there at all. I just want it to be a little tick of wax on there just to make it tacky, so that the fur will, the dubbing will attach better. I'm going to go back to my hare's mask, and I'm going to choose, in this case, I'd like it to have a slightly lighter colored body. They can be light colored, they can be dark colored, doesn't really matter. And in this case, I'm going to come over here and choose some of this little bit longer fur that you can see over in this part of the mask. I'm just going to come back, go to the mask, and just trim off a little clump of it. You don't need very much. Now, if you were using loose dubbing, you'd just come into your package and you'd take out a small pinch of it, and you, like I said, you really don't need much. Now with this, because I trimmed it off, there's all sorts of different lengths of fibers here, so I'm just going to sort of mix them together to disperse the different lengths of fibers throughout the whole ball of dubbing. So I get a nice mix, and it's not just all one length in one spot. And so what I have here now is just a little clump of very loose, soft fibers that I'm going to now apply to my thread so that I can wind it around the body. The way you do that is you take very small amounts at a time. You don't need much. Less is more in this case. I'm going to come up, I'm going to touch it, and this is where the wax helps. You can see how it likes to sort of already just sort of stick onto the thread. And then what you do is you just, in always the same direction, take your fingers and spin onto the thread. So I'll do that, and I'll spin that, and you can see it's now covered the thread, and you can no longer really see the thread, and that's all you want. Just to make a little noodle of that. Add a little bit more further down, a little bit more further down. This should be very, very sparse. This does not need much at all. Okay, it's just enough to cover the hook. I'm going to start with one wrap going backwards, and then slowly start moving towards the front of the hook. If I don't have enough, I can come back, add a little bit more to get to where I need to go. Okay, drop that down. And what you'd like to try to do is slowly build it wider. Just very slowly. We're not talking a huge amount, just a little bit. So you're kind of getting a bit of a, I don't know, a bit of a Winston Churchill cigar shape to it. As we head up to where we had stopped, where we had stopped our thread earlier. Take your time with this. If you need to add more dubbing, or if it's doing like this, just pull it off. grab a little bit more, reapply, a little bit more dubbing to it, spin it on. Now, the nice thing about this is it does not have to look really pretty. The intent of this is to look fairly buggy. Okay, so I'm just taking this, wrapping it around, coming forward. If it's getting loose in your thread, just come back, tighten it up on your thread with a few more spins like that. Bring it up. And that got fairly loose. I don't like that, so I'm just going to pull it off. Reapply, back to my thread. A few more turns, right? Whoops. See, it keeps coming off my thread. Not quite enough wax on my thread to help hold it in place. Yeah, where are we here? And just take your time with it. This is not a rush. Wrap it on. You can see it's not super beautiful. It's not really fine. It does look very buggy. Okay, and that's fine. Now what we're going to do is, I was wrapping this way from me around the hook, up and over with dubbing. I'm going to go the opposite direction with my wire. I'm going to come down around to the front. So I'll do one wrap right at the base, and then I'm just going to do some spiral wraps coming forward to make a rib, and I'm going to stop right with an extra wrap where the thread was. Lay it over. Take 3 wraps over. I can come in and just helicopter off the wire. Don't need to use your scissors to do that. Okay, so now we've got the basic body here. What we need to do now is we need to lay in some pheasant tail. That's going to be the casing for the body, and will also end up being the legs. So to do that, you'll take your pheasant tail, oops, and I'm just going to pan out here a little bit so we have a bit more visibility. You'll take your pheasant tail like this, and you can see that the fibers, if you just pull them, they're going to be all different lengths. So what you want to do is get a fairly decent clump of these, probably 10 to 15 fibers, and you're going to bring them up, and they're going to get all flared out and loose like this. But you're going to want to bring them up at 90 degrees to the stem of the feather. So you can do that, and when you do that, I'm just going to take it sideways here, you'll see that the tips all start to line up. So once you've done that, you have a choice now. You can either pull them off or you can cut them. I typically just come in with my scissors and just trim them off. And what we have here now is a nice clump of pheasant tail with these tips all lined up nicely. So what we're going to do is, we want these tips to be, later on, they're going to be part of our legs. So we're going to put the tips pointing up towards the eye of the hook. We want the amount that goes past the eye of the hook to be enough that when we fold them back later to make wings, they're going to be, or to make legs, they're going to be just long enough to sort of reach to the back of the hook. So if I'm going to have them finished off there, I want that to be a little bit, just a bit shorter than that. And there we go. So I'm going to bring my thread up to the eye. That's where I'll tie it in, because I know that will be long enough. And then I'm going to wind that back to where I had stopped the dubbing before, to tie that all down. Okay, and so we have a little bit going off the front of the hook, and we've got all of this clump here at the back. We're going to leave that on. We don't want to trim it off. Okay, now I'm going to do a little bit more body. Now I just for the thorax here, I'm going to choose some of this, which is just loose dubbing, not from the Hare's mask. It's a little bit darker, and that's what I'd like for that part. Does it have to be darker? No, I'm just choosing to do it that way for this particular fly. So I've got a small pinch. That's much more than I'm going to need, but I'm just going to mix it up a little bit. So I've got a nice organized or disorganized or whatever little mat of dubbing that I can use. Lay it down, come back, take my wax again and just re-wax my thread. Now all I'm going to do is put in some dubbing in that part there in the middle where you can see it's red. So I'll just take again small amounts, apply it to the thread by spinning it on, always in the same direction, spinning my thumb and forefinger. If you find that your fingers are too dry, you can just give them just a little lick to moisten them, which allows it to grab your fingers and spin a bit better. I'll take that dubbing and I'm just going to build up a nice thorax in here. I'm going to unwind that, add just a little bit more to my thread, just so I can get a sufficiently tapered and bulky thorax region. If I put on too much, I can always pull off a little bit, but it's best to put on thin amounts and add more if you need to. Do another wrap there to cover that up. Go back a little bit just to build up the bulk. Come to the forward, and I'll finish off with my thread, here by the eye. So you can see now that we've got a nice little bulb of new dubbing added in the middle there. Okay, what I'd like to do now is, this is going to be my wing case. It's going to come over top. So I'm going to take these fibers, fold them to the front, and I'm going to, just with my other hand here, push just very gently there. I'm just to kind of get them laid in the direction and place that I want them. So you can see that it's making a little bit of a cover over top. I want that to be only on the top. I don't want it to be rolling over the side of the hook, so it's going to be right on top. Come in with my other hand, pinch that right at the eye, because that's where I'm going to cinch it in. One slightly loose wrap, second one a little bit tighter, a little bit tighter, a little bit tighter, and that's secured. And you can see now there's a nice little case on the top. Okay, these fibers here we no longer need, so we can lift them up. We want to keep the pointy ones. Lift these up, and with my scissors, which I've got here, I can come in and trim them off very close. Okay, and so what we're left with is just a nice wing case on the top, and then still all of these tips that we had from before. Now what we want to do is we want to divide this cluster of pheasant tail tips into two parts that are going to go on either side of the hook. The easiest way to do that is just take your thumb or forefinger, push up from the eye, and they'll go vertical. Push them back over your fly, and you'll see that they start to immediately split. And what you can then do is, once they start to do that, is encourage them to go on either side of the fly. It's a little bit finicky work, not too bad. And then you're going to hold them back and take a few wraps right at the front to convince them to stay facing back. And I am just, there we go. I'll wrap that on, and I'm making right now just a little bit of a head, and you can see how the fibers are going on both sides. If they're a little bit wild, just tease them down to the location where you want them. Just gentle pulls, pushing them down. Make sure the fibers are all back. Oh, broke my thread. Don't want to do that. But when you do break your thread, do not panic about it. You can see it's not coming undone. It's still sitting there. I'll just put my thread back through my bobbin and just start right there again, and it'll be fine. So I'll just come back like I normally would. I'll come in 1, 2, 3 wraps over top just to get it secured. You can see that there are fibers kicking around. Don't worry about those. We'll deal with them in just a moment. Trim off this little waste piece from my broken thread reattachment. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to finish this off with a few half hitches, or if you are comfortable doing it, with a whip finish after I make my nice little head on it. So 1 half hitch, 2 half hitches, 3 half hitches. Make sure the eye is not crowded. Trim off your thread, and basically your fly is finished, apart from getting rid of some of this wild and crazy stuff. So I'm just going to come in and trim off these few fibers that went everywhere. You can see what we end up with is a set of legs, or wings if you want, legs I guess, that are on either side of the fly. And your fly is now finished. Oh, I've got a little piece of thread that I don't need there, so just pull it loose and, whoops, where we go here, trim. And you're done. You could put a little drop of head cement on there. I like to use, in my case, this Loon UV. That's just what I've come to like. It is very expensive, however, and by no means is it necessary. Just a normal shellac or normal head cement will do absolutely fine. Having done that, I'll just bring out my UV light and set it. And there you go. You can see that it's a very buggy looking, loose, fibrous looking fly. They work gangbusters, and it's a kind of fly that you should always have in your box when you're going out for trout, or if you're in this area in Saskatchewan looking for perch. Goldeye, they all will take this fly. And that's your very basic gold-ribbed hare's ear nymph. You should tie up a bunch of these. Thank you.